Hi, my name's Dee, your Professor of Woo Woo, and welcome to Sunchild Tarot, and welcome to Astrologer Extraordinaire, Lara van Zuydam. Thank you so much for coming onto the channel, Lara. How are you today?
Hi, Dee. Thanks so much for having me. I'm very well, thank you, and it's an absolute privilege to be here, so thank you very much.
Now, you've come on today because this is a subject that I don't know a great deal about, but I'm fascinated to learn more, to discuss esoteric astrology and some of the founding principles within it. But first, how's Venus Pluto going for you? And there we have it. Venus Pluto is.
So it's been interesting. It's manifested. It's manifested in various ways. Hopefully you can hear me.
Yeah.
It seems to potentially be manifesting here by destroying any attempt that we may.
And you've gone. Maybe we shouldn't talk about Venus Pluto.
Hopefully you
No. Can't hear a thing. And you're back. No, you're muted.
I honestly don't know what to tell you. I mean, I've done also.
I want to leave this in. Let's just keep going. There's a beautiful bit of Venus Pluto for everybody to see.
Yeah. So, all right. Let's pick it up where I attempted to to talk about it before I froze. So yeah, this is very much life imitating art. I suspect it's very much about something destructive. Perhaps, you know, Pluto is sometimes equated with electrical systems, although that's usually Uranus. It could be something that is destroying an attempt for us to have this conversation, and the something being the internet, one would imagine, in this particular scenario. So that is a very literal demonstration of Venus Pluto. But in terms of my own experiences, I've had a couple of interesting ones. About a month or so, when we first had a tester of that Venus Pluto dynamic, I very much experienced it, and this is quite odd, in the kind of femme fatale fashion that it sometimes plays out, in that I found that I was observing that dynamic in society when I went out one evening to train. When I was walking to the train station, I observed some manifestations of that kind of the sultry female archetype, and how that might play out in society, shall we say. And I noticed that immediately, and I thought, okay, well, that is interesting. It's demonstrating Venus Pluto. So there you are. More recently, it has certainly come to life in terms of its occult meaning. So Pluto being very much associated with the occult as well as Venus. And certainly from a Vedic astrology point of view, Venus is often associated with the occult. So putting those together, it's very likely that one will have occult experiences, meaning experiences with the unseen, with the mysteries. Perhaps by way of learning. Venus is often equated with learning in Vedic astrology, for example. So if you put those two together, you might find that you're going through a period of intense study of the occult, or you may be having some occult experiences, which I think you and I can both relate to.
Absolutely. After Christmas, I'll talk about the first conjunction to start off with, but I was left pretty much to my own devices with the first conjunction, just watching it go ping, ping, ping in other people's lives, secrets coming out, transformations coming out, things being revealed in relation to people's associations with value, with their love lives, with how they wanted to express themselves emotionally. And then Christmas Eve, I had one of them very special dreams where, you know, those dreams where you get "this is not a dream" in little subtitles along the bottom of it. Pay attention to this, where I had all five senses. I had touch, I had taste, I would say I had more than five senses by the end of it, where there was these beings injecting me with something. And then for some way in the dream, I was having a whale of a time after that point. But and that makes it sound like dodgy party drugs, and that wasn't what was going on. It was like some understanding was being delivered. But at the same time, I find out the next morning that my mother was saying, what was that big purple pink light coming in through the windows last night, when she lives in the middle of the countryside and there's no light sources outside whatsoever from her. So yeah, weird. But like you say, neither of us are strangers to weird. But there's, I'm looking forward with a little bit of hesitation to that final conjunction in March. I think we're going to be having quite an interesting time as this Venus-Pluto co-presence keeps giving its gifts, shall we say?
Indeed. And I mean, it's something that we should, pay attention to, where we've been given information, where we're having these unique personal experiences, often in a shocking way, as Pluto is wont to do.
Yeah, it's now, as I say, we want to talk about esoteric astrology, but first, your last blog post. There is going to be the link in the description down below for Lara's blog page, and you are talking about etheric bodies in terms of being without borders, humanity's etheric body in general, which to me automatically links with the various egregores that we are all dealing with, national identity, cultural identities, all sorts of things. Do you want to spend a couple of moments talking about that one?
Yes, happy to. So essentially, when we talk about etheric bodies, we're talking about the body's subtle energetic system, its system of meridians and beyond, that exists on a subtle plane. So something we can't necessarily see with our physical eyes, but indeed operates in conjunction with the physical body. Now, if you're a healer, if you are into any form of Eastern healing in particular, and also Western healing in different forms, you will be familiar with the meridian system, and you will understand that it's as important as the physical system. Now, what some people aren't aware of is that all of those etheric bodies that we have, so our etheric body is, my etheric body is connected to other people's etheric bodies. And so as a group, humanity is connected, has its own etheric body, which is connected to the solar system and so on. And that is how we live out the axiom as above, so below, the Hermetic principle. I think that's the best way I would describe that, as playing out within humanity.
So would you be saying, like, using the etheric bodies as seeing the method of, well, I want to say, how do I phrase this? Transfer of energy or transfer of information from chakra to chakra, but especially like Earth chakra, soul star chakra, before it's even entering into your own personal system?
I think there would be a transfer of energy going on, and I think the chakras would allow us to tap into the deeper energetic planes, or the subtler energetic planes. So it's basically a telephone number, I would imagine, into the particular esoteric level that we're dealing with. And that would absolutely transfer information to us. So we're picking up at a subtle level information, from the masses, and we need to be discerning about what we dial into, I guess. And when we receive the information, we need to be able to use our judgment in terms of what's useful and what's perhaps less useful, what's truth and what's not truth.
Now, I suppose in a way what you're saying with information transfer, because I know we're going to lead on into this with the esoteric astrology, but it's giving some causal, is it giving causal attributions to the planets, or are we still being able to look at the sky being a reflection, or is it more of that holographic? If it's going on within us, of course it's going on within the planets, and yes, there's information traveling, but most of the time that's just confirmation of your system looking at the planets and going, yep, same here.
Essentially how it works, certainly from a Chinese medicine point of view, based on my own understanding, is that we have self-replicating systems in the human body and in nature generally on Earth.
Yeah.
So our bodies will be a microcosm of what's going on in the macrocosm. So if you look at reflexology, for example, you have all the organs of the body in the sole of the foot.
Yeah.
And you can then, manipulate those energies, physically and otherwise. So that is essentially how it works. We have all of the ingredients within ourselves. Esoterically, we have divinity within ourselves. And therefore, we are fundamentally tapped into the source. And therefore, all the energies that trickle down from the source, and that's a very simplistic way of putting it, will affect us microcosmically. And that is why you often hear esoteric references to the fact that we are divine. We have divinity within ourselves. We are gods in our own right.
I mean, that's a very similar point of view from what you'll see within the black magic community about how the black magician is trying to learn and understand and express their own divinity as a part of a greater whole, but still coming to terms with their own divinity. So tell me more about the esoteric astrology then, because it sounds like it's
interesting that you say that, and that's a whole conversation in of itself, which would be very interesting to have. But when you bring in esoteric astrology, it's topical because fundamentally there's a distinction between those individuals who are aware of their souls and those individuals who are not yet in a position to be familiar with the fact that they are in fact an immortal being housed within a human physical body. And I think that's the sort of pivotal point which will determine, whether one is progressing on one's path, soul path, or not. And I do appreciate it. It's a controversial statement to make because it implies some sort of hierarchy. And I understand that it won't always sit comfortably with people. But essentially, esoteric astrology gives astrologers and, people who practice astrology the tools to be able to diagnose from the natal chart, amongst other things, the extent to which an individual is making progress on their particular path. So it's a diagnostic tool, and it does fundamentally imply that there's a division between those people referred somewhat archaically in the books because they date back to the 50s as common man. So the orthodox man, and the term man is obviously used, very out of date. But the common people, most people won't have that sense that there's something more than the physical body.
I see that there's a way to sidestep that hierarchy image.
Interested?
I think I've discussed this on the channel before. All time is happening at the same time. It's nothing more than a vector on a graph. You've got your X, your Y, and your Z axis, and then you have time, that fourth dimensional axis, but that's all it is. It's another axis in the graph. I'm having my past lives right now. I'm having my future lives right now. And every bit of me is in a certain, I don't know, call it like a valence energy level of understanding of its own divinity, which, as you've told me previously, in esoteric astrology, that's different from life to life, which means when you're looking at a selection of people's charts here and now, you're going to see people at different stages living different parts of their story. It doesn't make them any less, and it doesn't make them any more.
Exactly. I completely agree. And that would be the next point that I'd make is it doesn't, although it implies a kind of spiritual hierarchy, and we want to probably avoid that word. I do appreciate that. But at the same time, I do appreciate there's more to time than we may be able to comprehend at this time, so to speak. So there's a lot that we don't know, and therefore it's quite possible that there are parallel existences. And I know there are nuances to that, and that's a different discussion. But I think you're right that it doesn't mean that we're imposing any sort of value judgment on someone. In fact, the whole point of someone coming to an astrologer is to be able to empower them, to be able to see what dynamics are evident in the chart, what they have to work with, and what the dynamics are that are, coming towards them. And the whole idea one of the underlying principles in esoteric astrology is that you have these initiations during your lifetime, which are challenges. They're going to be fundamentally difficult. And the whole idea is that you progress. And therefore, you might have an individual coming to you, a client, for example, if you're an astrologer who wants a reading, and you'll be able to say, well, it looks based on what you've told me and what I can see in your chart that you may be experiencing an initiation onto the fixed cross, which might mean that you're actually making a huge transition, undergoing a massive spiritual transformation, which is a really positive event in your life. And the purpose of the reading, in many respects, is to empower the client to be able to understand the change and the challenges that they're going through, so that they can make the best of it and become the best version of themselves in an ideal scenario, depending on whether it's the right time for them.
Now, I do want to ask about the origins of esoteric astrology with Alice Bailey and some of how it differs from many of the other traditions of astrology. But first, you mentioned the fixed cross. Could you explain the crosses?
So the crosses, it's a mechanism, a tool for understanding the philosophy underpinning esoteric astrology. So, you have the mutable cross, which comprises the mutable signs. So your Pisces, your Gemini, and so forth. Then you have your fixed cross, which is equated with the fixed signs. So your Leo, your Aquarius, and so forth. And interestingly, the fixed cross can be equated with the world card in the tarot, which I find very interesting. So if you look at the world card, it has all of the symbols. And then finally, you have the cardinal cross, which is a different level, the final level of sort of soul development. And that's equated with the cardinal signs, so Aries, Libra, and so forth. And essentially, those are stages of development in the soul. And you may find, and this takes, the sort of theory is that this takes thousands of years and thousands of incarnations, but over time, you eventually move from the mutable cross to the cardinal cross. And then you spend exactly 12 incarnations. And I find that very interesting. And that, be interesting to do more work and study into that. Mm-hmm. And I have some thoughts on that. But apparently there are precisely 12 incarnations at the point of the cardinal cross before you escape the eternal wheel of birth and rebirth into spirit. And then you get onto a different level. Essentially, you no longer need to incarnate as a human. The starting point for all human beings is the mutable cross. So everyone will be working on personality for a good amount of lifetimes, and they will be experiencing the mutable dynamic. And they will fundamentally be experiencing change as a catalyst for experiencing those mutable dynamics in their lifetime, and initiations that they will encounter will be to develop their personality. And then eventually when they wake up, and it's referred to as the great illusion, so they wake up to the fact that there's more to life than, the physical human body, and that they have this, the tireless watcher, as it's described, the immortal being in the physical body, that they are then on the fixed cross, and they spend a good amount of time on the fixed cross, and they experience crisis to a large extent. And that initiates them eventually onto the cardinal cross, where they experience both change and crisis in the lifetimes.
That sounds fun.
I'll pause there. Indeed, it's very heavy. It's very heavy. But let's not forget that the whole point of human incarnation, and again, I accept that you may not subscribe to this philosophy, but I'm speaking it from my sort of perspective. The idea is that we experience both joy and pain in our incarnations. Mm-hmm. So it's never going to be purely one or the other. Under normal circumstances, you will have at least some experience of joy, even if you have a very tough life. So it's heavy, but it does imply that there's work to be done and there's responsibility to be taken. And that raises another controversial philosophical question, which is not everyone is comfortable with the idea of incarnation, because it suggests that somehow they have chosen, the difficulties that they currently might be confronted with. And let's face it, there's some terrible things going on in the world. And I think that's difficult for many people to swallow.
Now, I have to confess, I subscribe to that one. There's, I mean, for all of my black moments, all of my dark moments, I would not have got rid of them because I learned so much through them. So absolutely, I can imagine myself at like a all-you-can-eat buffet saying, well, I'll have my nervous breakdown there, and I'll have this partner that treats me crap, and then I'll have a nice bit, you know, let's have some pudding for a while. But there's another question that's raised from what you were saying. I'm going to ask in a moment about how people know how people can tell what crosses they are on from their chart. But there's an implication in what you're saying that the aim, once you get to the cardinal cross, is to become that more ascended being. And part of me, I wonder about that. And the reason I wonder about that, as a teenager, I got told that because I'm like the final degree of Pisces, that, well, nearly, you know, minutes away from it, that this is my life for jumping off the karmic wheel and getting out of the circulation of reincarnation. And my opinion has been, why? Because you hear from magical workings and from magicians, the spirits that are always saying, or you look at the Palladian channelings, for example, they're all saying, being here now, whatever that now will obviously have a capital N and mean whatever it may mean for you, is a gift, is a treasure, is a beautiful thing. So why would we want to jump off if we're constantly developing while we're here? Because here is supposed to be the place of free will. You look at what people say about the angels. The angels are wonderful beings with wonderful powers, but they have no free will. And yeah, I like my free will.
It's a fascinating question.
Sorry.
No, I interrupted you. Apologies. It's just so interesting. I mean, there's so many things to unpack there. But I think, so there are a couple of things I ought to mention. One is the whole idea in esoteric astrology is that we don't have the answers to all the questions, and we will never fully understand divine purpose until we escape the wheel.
And now you're back. Don't worry, I'll edit that bit out.
Interesting moments for it to bomb out. So just picking up where I left off, because I will make the point, which is that the whole idea and under this philosophy is that we won't have all the answers until we eventually escape the eternal wheel. So we will never fully understand divine purpose. But when you finally get to the point where you are ready to escape into spirit and leave the wheel of incarnation on earth, you then finally understand the divine purpose. So there's a slight, it's a slightly circular position that we're in at the moment, and we're operating on faith to a large extent, and then that begins to smack of religion, and some people won't be comfortable with that. And I do take your point. I think it is really interesting experiencing these incarnations, but I've also spoken to people who are tired of incarnating as a human. And they can't wait to escape it because they just feel that it's just enough. You know, they've learned so much. They feel that they've learned a lot. They feel that their lives have been difficult. It's not to say that they don't enjoy their lives. They do, but they're actually looking forward to what's next. So that's part of it. I would say that my understanding very, very broadly and very, very sketchily is that the idea is once we escape to spirit, we then move through a different set of levels of being, and I'll go into some of that shortly. But eventually the idea is to go back to divinity, to go back to the source. So we make our way back to whatever divinity means for us. And I think that's broadly consistent with the tree, the Kabbalistic tree of life as well. So it kind of makes sense. But I would mention at this point that the idea underpinning esoteric astrology is that once you leave the cardinal cross, you escape into a plane of consciousness called the hierarchy. Now here's the H word again.
I was going to say, there's that word.
So here's where it gets really esoteric. When Alice Bailey channeled these readings, or this work. I mean, that's what she did. She channeled this work. She claims to have channeled it through an individual calling himself the Tibetan, who was the leader of a group of lamas. Now, the weird thing is, not only did she claim to channel this information from him, but he apparently lived contemporaneously with her. She just didn't happen to know him person to person, but he was obviously somewhere, he claimed to be somewhere in existence. So that's a whole other bit of weirdness that we have to park to one side for now. But essentially, if you accept that, he then mentions that he is acquainted with a group of beings who he refers to as the hierarchy. Now, the hierarchy are broadly consistent with a group of beings that many magicians will tell you that they have encountered and work with actively, called the Council of Elders or the Elders. And there are a couple of different names of that nature. And these elders, or the hierarchy, as Alice Bailey describes them, are charged with basically having an oversight role in relation to humanity in a sort of paternalistic way, not interfering with their free will, but making sure that things broadly go in accordance with the divine plan, whatever that is. And I do appreciate that I don't have all the answers, and we don't have all of the answers, but that's the theory, that's the philosophy.
I mean, to put that more in layman's terms, the way I'm understanding that for obviously my comics audience, in Marvel, they have Urtu the Watcher, who has an oath that he cannot interfere with what he is watching, apart from when he does.
That makes sense.
There's so tell me a bit about Alice Bailey.
So she was born, I believe, in 1880. She was born in the UK, but she spent most of her life in the US, where she was a teacher and a writer. And that's the broad synopsis. That's pretty much what I understand about her. She was very reluctant, I believe, to publish these works, but eventually did so. And she was reluctant to divulge the name of this Tibetan, this individual through whom she channeled these works. I would also mention that it seems like to some people, to skeptics, understandably, it would seem a stretch too far, But when you pick up one of these books and you look at the complexity and the technicalities, particularly as an astrologer, if you understand some of the astrology, it just seems a tall order for an ordinary human being to have made all of this up, and for it to be so consistent, given all of its complexities. That's my current judgment of it.
Especially when you look at, Tibetan mysticism has a wonderful history and complexity that's, well known among the people who have read about it. So that doesn't seem too surprising that if it's all genuine, it would have that complexity. And I suppose the word is esotericism, isn't it? There's
Indeed.
So how would someone know if they have which particular cross within their chart?
So the fundamental question to ask yourself, I guess, or your client, is whether or not you're aware that there's something more to your physical body and that you have a soul. The idea is if you understand that you are an immortal being and not just your physical body, then you are already on the fixed cross. So you've already made the transition from the mutable cross, where you're just developing your personality. And now you are on the path of the disciple, the initiate, under that system. And so you will, chances are you will be experiencing crisis in your lifetime and lifetimes whilst you're in this phase.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one way of doing it. There's a lot more, and you can really, when you study this stuff in detail, and I've done a class, and I will be doing teaching a class in March on it in more detail. But there are certain methods that one can employ by looking at the planets. So the sun, for example, will give you an indication of all your previous karma. And karma is not intended to mean punishment. It's simply the accumulation of the decisions you've made across your lifetimes. Your sun will indicate that, will be the key to the personality. Your ascendant then will give you an indication of your soul's purpose. So you may find, for example, that you have a I don't know, a fixed ascendant, and maybe that's one clue. But it doesn't exhaustively mean that because you have planets in, say, the fixed signs or the cardinal signs, that you necessarily are on that cross. You've got to make a value judgment by asking yourself or your clients a series of very carefully crafted questions and being very honest and putting all the pieces together forensically.
And also there's a completely different system of planetary rulerships in esoteric astrology.
Indeed. So that's a good point. So if memory serves me correctly, Mercury on the fixed cross rules Aries, as opposed to Mars. So if, for example, you had a very active Mercury or a very problematic Mercury, or, you know, Mercury seems to is your chart ruler, for example, is the ruler of your ascendant, that might be one indication that Mercury is very important to you, and maybe one further indication that you, or the individual, whoever that is, when I say you, I say generically, intended to mean generically, is on the fixed cross.
So there was an interesting turn of phrase that you used. Mercury on the fixed cross rules Aries. So does that mean the rulerships change as opposed to what cross you believe you're looking at in the chart?
Indeed. And when I say fixed cross, that would also apply to the cardinal cross. Right. So they do. So they, again, that's that polarity between the great illusion, which is where you don't realize that you're an immortal being and you're living a day-to-day existence, you know, based on a mundane reality only, and you're working on your personality. And we've all been there, regardless of where we think we are. We all start there. And then on the other hand, the path of the initiate, the great, you know, the great work, as we would refer to it in Western esotericism, the path of light. And therefore, there's a distinction between the ordinary planetary rulerships, which apply if you're on the mutable cross. And if you're reading for someone who's on the mutable cross, you would apply the ordinary rulerships as an astrologer. But then the unorthodox rulerships would apply when you move on to, or you're reading for someone on the fixed or the cardinal cross. And it doesn't mean that you can't also use the ordinary rulerships. It just means that you need to bring another dimension of complexity into the reading, and it's often extremely illuminating.
I mean, there's part of my reaction to that is, oh, great, more complexity. But another part of me goes, yay, more, because I naturally love the complexity of things. And that leads me to a question I've been trying to phrase in my head about, so you've got a client for a reading, or you're looking at somebody's chart, and you're working with traditional, Hellenistic, modern, whichever form of astrology, and then you can apply the filter of the esoteric, or do you just put all the other things aside and go, no, I'm looking at this in the esoteric frame and we'll deal with all the other stuff later? Or is there, as ever seems to be growing nowadays, and I'm a big fan of, a certain element of mix and match?
Another great question. I am a massive fan of mix and match, but I do appreciate there will be some astrologers out there who want to apply a pure esoteric astrology filter or lens to the reading. The way I do it is, first of all, I won't always use esoteric astrology. Mm-hmm. If I feel intuitively, or if someone asks me to do so, I will incorporate esoteric astrology as an additional layer over and above the other rules that are very useful, actually, in many respects. So I can get a lot of mundane information about the person's day-to-day life and their body and so forth that they might find helpful. But when it comes to the spiritual aspects of the chart, then it's really important to begin to consider using things like esoteric astrology. So, for example, I have had a client recently who wanted specifically to understand, you know, what the outlook was for her spiritually. She felt that she was at a bit of a dead end. So I thought in that case, it was very useful to apply esoteric astrology and try to establish whether she was undergoing any of these initiations, and that would help her make sense of the position she found herself in life and be able to see the bigger picture, which of course will influence things like career choices. So if someone's been feeling very sort of apathetic about the career to date, to have a bigger picture understanding is often helpful. Now, there are other orthodox methods that we can use in say, Hellenistic astrology that would give insights into that. So, for example, where the ruler of the ascendant is positioned will give you a very good indication of where that person is going to focus their lives, the ascendant itself. But again, we can't forget that many astrologers will use these tools in more of a mundane way rather than an esoteric way. So I think even though I tend to use these traditional tools, traditional astrological tools, Hellenistic and otherwise, I use them in a more spiritual way than perhaps other more psychological astrologers might use them. So it really depends on your philosophy, and importantly, the philosophy of your client, whether you're the right astrologer for them. This certainly is not a one size fits all. And as always, it's more complex. You've got to do that analysis. You've got to reach a judgment as to what's best for the client.
And that philosophy for each individual person is indeed an expression of their chart and of their development all at the same time as well, isn't it?
I agree. So they, will naturally gravitate towards that if that's right for them. But for me to attempt to foist esoteric astrology onto someone who say quite clearly to me on the mutable cross, they probably wouldn't even come to me for an astrology reading, to be fair. I mean, I know people who are complete atheists is the wrong term, definitely the wrong term, but they don't believe in anything esoteric. And so they wouldn't even have the reading. But if they decided to do some sort of party trick type, ask for a party trick type reading, which I wouldn't want to do anyway, but they might go to an astrologer and want to just test it. And often people do test these things. And that's where they are surprised. That might be a turning point for them. And that's really important. And they might find that's where the astrologer can think, well, actually, this person's eyes are opening. They're realizing there's more to it. And maybe I can be helpful in bringing certain information to light.
And there's only so much help any person can give. I mean, even the best gurus, there's only...
Agree.
We are all limited by language. Like we were saying with the word hierarchy and how it's making us both go,
yes, we don't like it.
Because culturally it's not a good word at the moment.
No, it's awful.
But there's also there's this discussion of the concept of leaving source, returning to source, because partly I think you can turn around and say, yes, your point of awareness of source is the bit that moves on some sort of axis that doesn't really exist, because technically, how can we actually leave source if source is everything anyway?
It's a good philosophical question again, nice chunky one. But then that goes back to my point about we don't have all the answers. We are so limited right now as to what we actually know. And we do discover, even in science, we discover new things all the time. We move Galileo, for example, controversial theory, on I believe the heliocentric model, if I'm remembering correctly. And he was sort of laughed out of town. And the reality is that was a new innovation. So we have to accept that there are things that we don't know, even at a mundane level, we don't know it all. So esoterically, goodness only knows, what's out there. We're just beginning to have our minds opened as a kind of human species.
Yeah. So
we're entering.
We have as appropriate to our development at that stage.
Correct. There will be things we don't understand, and it's quite difficult. But I think we are drifting, as I've put it before, into this age of Aquarius, where suddenly things become clearer. But it certainly doesn't mean we have all the answers. It just means that we're getting a little bit more information, but a lot of it we won't know and might cause us discomfort. And so we have to go by what we feel. And this is what's difficult to describe to people who are not esoterically minded. They say, well, how do you know that? And I say, well, that's just a feeling I get. They won't understand clairsentience, for example, or clear cognizance. So you have to go by what it feels fundamentally right for you. I can give you all the theory. Anyone can give all the theory in the world, and there will be things that don't feel right and don't sit comfortably. And then all of a sudden, something might click, or it never clicks, but something else, another philosophical framework might sit better. And that's because it's the right thing for the right individual at that time.
Now, you used a keyword, trigger word,
what did I use?
Phrase during all of that, Age of Aquarius. Now, people who have watched the channel for a long time have heard me rail against, we're not there yet. You know, technically, like, my background for uni was observational astronomy. You know, we're just on the sheer maths, we're not there yet. But how do you feel? How do you feel about our approach into this? Is it close? Have we got a lot more work to do? And on that note, how do you view, under this esoteric lens, the great mutation into this era of air?
Interesting questions. Lots to unpack again. So number one, I'd be super interested in having a discussion with you separately at some point about the mathematics underpinning what I would term the precession of the equinoxes, because my understanding is that there are different schools of thoughts on that. And I haven't formulated my own view on this, but defer to people who clearly have mathematical brains and expertise when I don't. But in terms of the Age of Aquarius, I mean, last year's sort of Jupiter-Saturn conjunction gave us a taster of what is to come, I suspect. And to my mind, you know, the pandemic was very much about isolation. And that is very Aquarian. So that's giving us a taste of, well, maybe we're not going to be as earthy and sort of in each other's faces as we have been for many, many generations. Maybe there's going to be, by necessity, more distance. By its very nature, we've begun to, you know, the nature of the pandemic, we have now been forced to look to the internet more and more, which has, you know, advantages and disadvantages. Some people have struggled with that. Other people have found that really empowering, so they haven't had to down tools. They can just proceed online. You know, introverts will enjoy not having to be in front of people in real life and having more distance. But with it comes a coldness that we can't ignore. And that's very Aquarian. But Aquarius is also equated with Uranus, so Uranus being the modern ruler. And that, of course, is equated with artificial intelligence and robotics. So that could potentially be a clue into what is to come. But also we have Pluto making its way towards Aquarius, don't we?
Yes.
So that is going to be very interesting as well. And we're going to get a massive taste of Aquarius as Pluto sort of makes its way. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens at the time of ingress. Because often when you have planets ingressing into a new sign, really significant things happen immediately, and you immediately get a flavor of what that period is going to entail.
That's excuse me, an interesting point that you make there, and a quick guest appearance of your latest blog. Like I said, link will be down below, regarding the artificial intelligence and regarding the effect. We've already seen the effect that the Facebook and the YouTube algorithm are having on society. So once you have you seen that Replica, your own artificial intelligence friend app that you can get for your phone now, which I know it's terrifying. I mean, as much as I try to leave my tinfoil hat in the cupboard, there is a bit of me that is absolutely, because of the way it's designed to learn from you. You learn to communicate with it, it learns to communicate with you, but there's also the big style about you are learning how to communicate with it. Now, language is very much a tool that we use to define our reality. So if we are learning a very specific communication style, that can affect the way that we are viewing our own personal realities around us. So I think, one, on a technological level, that's wonderful. That's so impressive. But on a, oh my God, what is this going to do to my sense of identity, the way I view the world, to society? It's also, it could be beautiful, but it could be absolutely terrifying at the same time, because there's so much where it could go horribly wrong. Do you have any thoughts on the whole? Well, I mean, I know you do, because I read your last blog. But
Indeed.
you want to
But I
share
also, thanks for asking, because I don't want to suggest or sort of give the perception that there's a kind of bias against artificial intelligence and robotics. I just think, as with all things in life, we need balance. And I think it's important that we don't allow a state of imbalance to ensue. And it's very interesting, because I think we need those things. We need innovation. We need to grow, but we need to learn lessons from the past. And depending on how esoteric one is, one may believe in Atlantis and how they ended up blowing themselves up. And one may believe that our current generation of humanity is, say, the 5th generation. And we've done this a couple of times before. When are we going to learn? So we need to think about building in some checks and balances. Now, currently, for example, in the legal system and the lawmaking system, you have checks and balances. You have, if you're a democratic state, you have democracy. There's a particular process. And you have courts with judges who are properly trained, and in some cases juries, and that's your check and balance. But how do you deliver that in the case of a robot, for example? Will we get to the point where we come unstuck because we have developed a very sophisticated machine with limited conscience in the way that humanity has, and limited ability to reason? We might be able to fool ourselves into thinking we might be able to develop the ability to rationalize, but we can't lose sight of the fact that as humans, we are unique because of our humanity. And can we really replicate that in robotics? So that's one thing. The other thing is just making sure that we just, when we're programming these things, and I think I mentioned in my blog, a friend of mine made this point, when we're programming them, what are our biases? What biases are we potentially programming with them? It's a massive responsibility. Are we sufficiently qualified to be able to program these things, which could be shaping our future? And I think regulators are probably asking themselves similar questions, if I put my other hat on.
I mean, that brings us back to that point that I was saying about language. Language gives us the ability to think, but language in itself creates the channels that those thoughts can go down. That is why there is such a difference between thoughts and feelings, because your language can say one thing, and then there's that little bit of you going, no. It might be logical, but it's not right. Or another feeling that's going, yes, and that's beautiful, whichever. But their thoughts and feelings are not the same thing. And we can program something to think, but can we program something to feel?
Exactly. And often we are affected by relationships. So we might have one mindset, and then we have a chat with a friend, and we connect maybe through our etheric bodies, maybe at a soul level. We remember something. That person has triggered me to remember something based on maybe a past life that I had with them. I'm just, I'm really sort of hammering the past life route now, but I don't intend to. But it could just be that I have a simple conversation with a friend, and they remind me of something, which makes me just that little bit more empathetic, or just that little bit more self-reflecting, and that changes the course of my decision. Will we be able to replicate that with artificial intelligence going forward and robotics? That is the question.
And I'm going to now leave that one there, because we've been going for a while. Before we talk ourselves into the end of humanity as we speak, is what projects you've got coming up? You've mentioned you're doing a class in March.
Yes, so I will be presenting a class at Synchronicity University, which is online.
Yeah.
So if you want to learn more about Synchronicity University, go to Nadia Shah's website on YouTube. But essentially, I will be teaching Esoteric Astrology. It'll be about an hour and a half. And I have presented previously at OPA on Esoteric Astrology. This will be building on the concepts that I laid out in that talk. So if you did attend that talk, I will be building on those concepts and going more deeply into them.
I'm going to be signing up. How do people find you, other than the blog link down below?
So hopefully, my website will also be available, yogamancy.me. I have a YouTube channel at this time, but it hasn't really taken off yet because I need to put a little bit more effort into it. So, watch that space. But I think for now, also on Instagram, so Lara van Zuydam, Astrologer, on Instagram.
Well, Lara, thank you so much. You're coming back, aren't you? So
yes, that would be an absolute pleasure.
Brilliant.
Indeed.
So in that case, so if there is anybody that's left out there unnerved, especially with Venus Pluto going on and all this stuff coming out and that things being questioned and foundations being shaken and going through transformations, is there some how do I phrase this, message of hope you can also give with this upcoming astrology the next year? Is there anything that says to you, in esoteric astrology, is Jupiter in Pisces as good as where it seems to be everywhere else?
Ooh, what a question to end off on. So it is going to be great, but one thing I would be particularly mindful of is the impact meteorologically on the oceans. So when you put Jupiter in Pisces near Neptune in Pisces, you have a recipe for lots and lots of water and inclement weather. So I'd be very careful without wanting to scare people, because we wanted to end off on a message of hope.
Positive note, remember.
Positive note. One cautionary thing is just be aware, when you're traveling on the ocean or you're engaging in anything related to the sea or water, be mindful of that. On the other hand, Jupiter in Pisces, it's a natural place for Jupiter. It's a very positive place, and it does suggest lots of positive growth and a cause for optimism. But obviously that will affect everyone's chart in different ways. And so you probably need to get a more detailed reading to understand how that will play out in your chart. But generally, that is a fantastic position for it to be in. And that is definitely what I would single out as something really positive on the horizon for us. But it will move swiftly through Pisces, so make the best of it.
On the note of personal readings, are you taking on personal readings at the moment?
Yes, I do have some capacity, so feel free, if you would like a reading, to get in touch with me, hopefully via the links that are available.
Everything will be down at the bottom. So Lara, thank you so much for coming. We'll catch up again soon and explore the esoteric astrology a little bit further. Thank you very much. So as ever, please like, share, subscribe, all that YouTube stuff. I'll also put the link for Lara's own YouTube channel down there. So at the moment you can subscribe to that one. That's because I had a look this morning and I couldn't see any videos. No,
it is waiting to be developed. So yes, one of those things that I need to get to and hope to do so very soon. So thank you for bearing with me.
I will announce on this channel the moment that you get some of your own videos out, just like we're doing with David, who should be, because I'm not doing, I've not had the opportunity to dig into this upcoming new moon in Capricorn, as wonderful as it is. I've left just the miserable ones for myself. Then David is hopefully doing his own show on his own channel to really launch his channel on the new moon. So as ever, I will leave the links in the community tab, and it will be beneath, hopefully, when I get some readings out. Thank you, Lara. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and have a great year.